Thank you very much. Thank you, really. It's quite an honor to be able to address you in this plenary session, and I hope to have a sort of smooth follow-up to the two speakers. Before me, I'm going to talk about the role of the public sector in promoting innovation, which is a kind of a boring title. I apologize for that. But and I thought I'd go through it backwards, looking first at innovation and about promoting innovation, and then what the public sector can do about it. And actually, I'm going to go even further backwards to the title of the session, which I liked a lot. It's Smart Cities versus Smart Citizens, which I would like to address a little more in depth than the speakers before me, because it sort of assumes that we have a conflictual role between citizens and cities, or any form of government, as it were. And I think unless we look at the uneasiness that pervades at least Europe today, we're not going to make much progress in terms of smartness. Because the assumption is that by throwing smartness into the equation, we can somehow address the relationship between citizens and cities. Smartness is first thought of something we can throw at cities, and that will make things work better. And now we're beginning to think we can throw smartness at citizens, and that will make things work better. But maybe we should also be looking at throwing smartness at the relationship between citizens and cities. And that's sort of what I'd like to look at. Citizens are uneasy with regards to their cities because of the big challenges. We are possibly at the end of an era. The severe financial crisis is not just about banks and the computer models that they got wrong. It's about the end of a European social model, basically. Climate change is no longer a joke. Just look at what is happening right now in Budapest. And a debate undermining the whole thing is what is called the democratic deficit, which is the citizens versus cities question. Is that if you look also at what is happening politically across Europe today, there is such a gap in the relationship of trust and engagement between citizens and local government that it is difficult to confront just about any question. So the first thing we need is to realize that in general terms, the tried and tested solutions simply don't work the way they used to. Politicians are generally trying the same old things. I keep hearing the word growth. I don't want to get into that, but that's sort of almost a knee-jerk solution to things. But no growth is happening. And even 20 years ago, I remember working with the European Commission on a group trying to figure out why do we have growth and no jobs. And all of this is increasing insecurity among citizens because what they're being told is going to work is not working. And people are aware that there's a need for a transformational change. We need new citizens in the sense that we ourselves need to change our behaviors, our lifestyles, and our work styles, the way we go about things, and people are aware of that, though not totally satisfied with the feeling that they're doing anything in particular about it, except for separating their garbage. And we need new cities. There is beginning to be now an awareness of the need for a totally different approach towards governance of the public good, and what is in the public good and what is the public good. Now let's look at smartness. There is technical smartness, and we've just heard all about it, everything mobile and cloudish and smart grids and big data and all that kind of stuff does lead to, one assumes, an increase in the efficiency of city systems. This is a claim made against large investments, particularly in concerns energy, which is dominating EU policy towards smart cities at the moment. And there is this vision, I like to call the IoT the idea of self-aware systems. I think the Chinese Prime Minister called it the wisdom of the earth, which is a nice way of thinking of IoT, and sort of a new form of people interacting with technologies. But there's also human smartness, which is what I thought was the main lesson from our cross-country skier this morning. Clarity of vision, shared purpose, Are we seeing that as an integral part of technical smartness, social engagement, citizen empowerment, people's interaction, which all very much goes through an idea of a democratic appropriation of technology? It's sort of badly translated from the Italian, but it's basically the idea that all of these smartphones or tablets are not made for you to just watch more trash TV on the plane. They are tools which, if you get inside them, not you because you all know how to do that anyway, but normal people, get inside them and learn how to use them and make them theirs, and the things they build and create theirs, and people become creative with them, that is a democratic appropriation of technology. And ultimately leads to the logic, and again, the cross-country skis come in, of doing more with less. And there is a movement now around called frugal government, which is about the possibility of doing more with less, and maybe we don't need all that money anyway. So that sort of puts innovation in place of all of those arrows. Innovation in the sense that something's got to change. And the links and the relationships between smartness, both human and technical, and citizens and cities, is not only the enabler of innovation to happening, but is also one of the ultimate ends. Now let's stop for a moment and think about technology. I think someone mentioned the iPod previously. When we think of technology and innovation, we normally think of objects, of things, particularly things that you buy, and particularly things that Steve Jobs invented. Although it's nice to know that Slovenia has its Steve Jobs model. And this is basically the idea of technological innovation, and most public policy is aimed at making more of these things happen. But technology also has a second definition, which is an anthropological definition, which puts emphasis on the way people use things, which is quite often very unexpected as compared to what, say, the engineer here did to make a wine bottle safe for production, fit into containers, and so on and so forth. Here we're seeing a totally different usage of a technology, like with the cross-country skis. And there we're talking more, I guess, about human smartness. So, if all of that is the case, how do you promote innovation? There is the sort of standard response is to imagine innovation is a linear process. This is a very old diagram that I use on purpose, taken off the internet. And it's sort of the basic logic that you have a light bulb on one side if somebody gets a brilliant idea, and then you make a product, and then you do marketing. Marketing, which is to convince people that they need it, actually. And that once you've done marketing, then you've finished. And most public policy sort of tries to make that happen. In fact, the triple helix model is what we hear a lot about. As the only problem were to make ideas coming out of universities linked to firms. I don't see any citizens in here, and that is perhaps one of the problems of the triple helix model, and the whole idea of pushing innovations that people may not want at all. That is what gave birth to the Living Lab concept that was basically born by Nokia, pushed, at least in Europe, by Nokia in 2006 after all of the failures of the telecom industry to figure out what people actually wanted when people were doing things like using SMS and turning their business models upside down on them. And so the idea of a Living Lab is to take all of the triple or whatever, how many helixes you have on the left-hand side of that slide, and to put them into contact with citizens, which means building trust, it means mediating between people, it means engaging people actively in technology creation processes, which as it ends up is more difficult than it seems, and it's not only a one-way process, because all of the actors on the other side, the people that do the funding, the enterprises, the public administrations, the universities, and the research organizations have to sort of relearn about what people are like in the first place in order to actually interact with them. After that, we had the concept of the territorial living lab, which sort of takes that even one step further, linking it to the specific features of a given territory, the territorial capital, which is made up of the specific way people eat food, specific way the climate, the way people have grown up, as being something that generates a special kind of social innovation, which can be very specific to different areas. And this links a little bit to the long tail discussion about smart cities that we heard before that. And now the big thing is social innovation, which has become almost embarrassingly in fashion. And this is more or less the definition that the European Commission gives of innovation that is both social in its ends and its means. And there are three types of social innovation identified by the BEPA study. One that addresses unmet social demands. The second, which is societal challenges, which is where most smart cities types of logics fall into. And the third is transformational change, which is using innovative processes to basically reinvent the way we work and the way government happens. And in recent work I'm doing in Sicily, which we'll be discussing Wednesday, we'll discuss that despite however you try to mess up the statistics, the third type is the most predominant among what is actually happening, particularly among young people today. They are basically reinventing society and nobody really is totally aware of what's going on. So now, what about the public sector? I was supposed to tell you about the public sector in this talk. This is an old diagram, rather humorous, though if it doesn't make you cry, that was meant to illustrate the idea of e-government. And there you see a government form coming out of a computer with a rather techno-looking hand. But that is not far from some of the initial ideas of e-government treating citizens as customers. This was very much in the 1980s, and basically applying the value chain concept to government and sort of automizing government in order to provide a more efficient and effective delivery of those services. And then we have the public-private partnerships, which have been treated with more or less suspicion according to where you live, which in theory take a little bit of the burden off the public sector, take some responsibility, but this whole mess, I would say, has caused a lot of citizen uneasiness and a lot of the questioning about what is the public sector there for in the first place? What is it supposed to be doing if all of it does is tell the private sector to do what it does, supposedly doing it better? And I think this kind of logic has been around long enough so that people are not entirely convinced that the private sector does it better or cheaper. What we're actually seeing is an evolution of the logic of e-government is moving from sort of a back office automation towards citizen-centric e-government, towards the co-production of public services with and by citizens. This is a transformational change in the way government works. This is government opening its doors, its walls, and deciding to collaborate with citizens in order to reinvent the way services are delivered. And that leads almost directly to, this is what the Commission is showing us today. And this is the model for open government, which is based on open data, open services, where there's plenty of cloud in there to make you happy, and open decisions. But basically, this is an idea of government which changes its nature. But is this a government that's doing anything? That's the question. What should governments be doing? And that's what people are wondering, and nobody's really giving them a good answer. So, let's start all over again. Let's suppose that with smart citizens in smart cities, in a sort of way out kind of logic, we have social innovation as driving citizen engagement, open government as being able to engage with citizens, human smartness in addition to technical smartness at the bottom, and innovation ecosystems as driving and managing this whole new interaction. By innovation ecosystem, what I mean is that rather than considering different types of innovation, industrial innovation, scientific innovation, social innovation is on a linear process, is that there are actually different types of innovation which all have their life cycles and they actually interact with each other. And this is crossing these boundaries and putting into connection social with scientific innovation scientific with industrial is the idea of the triple helix, but scientific with institutional innovation is what we really should be doing. We're really thinking about it in the sense that if you're involved in one kind of innovation, maybe it's good for you every now and then to think about what are the other people in a map like this doing, and is the kind of innovation I'm working with going to require innovation in the other side of things. And so this leads me finally to the topic of this talk. What kind of roles might governments be playing in order to promote innovation? Not buy it, but to promote it, actually. How can, there's a brilliant definition of human smart city as being run by governments that engage with citizens because they are open to being engaged. And how can a government become open to be engaged? Well, there are some situations, many in EU projects, where governments are trying out different roles. The easiest one for them to play as government is policymaker, because that's determining criteria to spend money, which is the only thing they really know how to do. This is some policy recommendations coming from the Central Lab project, which many of you know of, which tries to encourage governments to promote open innovation and citizen engagement in the policies it makes. But you can also have the government as a mediator. This is coming from a project on e-participation, where we're taking traditional, this is strategic and territorial planning processes, putting the citizens in the middle in a living lab logic, and therefore reshaping the role that governments have in the planning process, which is traditionally very, very top-down. Government is a procurer. There's not been much talk here about commercial procurement, where governments, instead of funding innovation by giving money to research centers, say, I need a new way to make copies of documents. Can somebody invent something for that? And shifting the enormous budgets they have just to buy things as a way to fund innovative solutions to the kinds of things they just normally need every day to monitor forests, to manage traffic, and so on and so forth. That's a needs-driven approach, which takes place, the European Commission is pushing this very much now, and it takes place through a sort of staged process, starting from a competition for ideas through prototype development and so on and so forth. It's proving wildly successful, except for the problem of difficulties of governments being able to handle that kind of concept, particularly the accounting departments. Here we have government in a public-private partnership, but acting as partners in creating value. I won't go through the diagram because it's too complicated, but the question is, how could a park authority collaborate with a service provider providing tourism services with citizens for smartphones to validate the information that they can capture by taking pictures of wildlife and so on, and bring that into the official data stream. So that requires a deep revision of what both sides do best, and new business models, not only for the private sector, but also for government. We also have government as a caretaker. This is from the Citadel project, which will be discussed also later on in this conference. And there the idea is that open data is one of those things that's in the public good, that it's a public commons thing. Here the role of government is to set the rules and make sure that there is an open, fair treatment of open data, whoever produces it, be it the government or a smartphone user. And finally, from the Periferia project, we have the idea of government as peer. And we developed a platform and a process where governments can sit down at a table together with citizens in the ICT community, particularly the digital innovation community, and say, look, we have a problem, or listen to other people's problems and try to work together to invent a new way to solve it. So, governments are beginning to explore and experiment with new roles they can have in promoting innovation systems that include themselves. Networking is an important step, particularly with local governments that tend to be very much closed into their own lives. And here I mention a series of networks and networked initiatives that we have been carried out that you can find, that where we are trying to bring together governments that take at least a political stance of declaring certain values and wanting to share their experiences and learning from each other. The 2014-2020 programming period will be crucial to what will happen in the future. It is a critical moment for EU policy, and I'm not talking only about Horizon 2020, I'm talking about the ERDF funds in particular, the smart specialization strategies, and the degree that the public authorities show their willingness to innovate in these strategies will be extremely important as to their ability to solve the problems that citizens really care about seeing addressed. So, in conclusion, citizens and cities both need human smartness to really address the big challenges. But in order to promote technical and social innovation, the public sector must itself innovate. It can no longer stand outside of the arena and say, okay, fine, I will evaluate you, judge your projects, and give you money. It has to put itself within the system, the innovation system itself, and innovate together with the other actors. New and promising models are, however, being explored for future policy implementation. Thank you very much.